So you got two handouts today. The first one is obviously exercise 114, which is a continuation of what we were doing last class. I will walk through kind of the final pieces of this so you can see me go through it. But the other one that you got is your next assignment, 104. So as we discussed last class, assignment 103 technically was due on Monday, but I made a mistake and didn't put it on the calendar, so it was changed to being due today. With that being said, we have our next assignment, so you see that follows suit. The next one will rely very heavily on the pen tool. You'll learn a lot graphically in shapes and kind of how to work with fills, colors, swatches. We're going to talk about color theory, so as you choose which colors you're going to pick, those things will start to matter a little bit more, and they'll all kind of piece together. But I give it to you today so that you can start thinking about it and kind of working through what's appropriate. We will revisit Charlie Harper a little bit more next week, so you'll see a bunch of examples. I'll show you student work and that sort of thing so you can become familiar with it. And we'll kind of discuss that a bit more then. But at least for now, you can see what's coming and what's going on. You will need, it's due on the 26th of October, which is a Wednesday. So we've got a few weeks for that to happen, okay? So today I'm going to talk a little bit more, and this is not going to be a particularly long lecture, again, focused on practice with the pen tool, but I think it's important to at least acknowledge or talk about the difference between something like Photoshop and something like Illustrator. And it's very easy as a student to say, well, wait a minute, why don't I just create everything in Photoshop? And if I go back in time, the first portfolio I ever made, every page was in Photoshop. And that was it, because I didn't know InDesign, I didn't know Illustrator or any of the other programs. It was like, okay, well, I'll just use Photoshop. But it's important to understand why one program is better at one thing and another program is better at something else. And so this is a question that I get very, very frequently, so I figured it was a good time to put it into kind of a lecture format so you can see and we can discuss this a little bit more formally. So raster graphics are essentially the types of graphics that we use in photographs, okay? And these photographs, you guys, you're familiar with digital cameras. You buy a digital camera and it tells you, oh, the lens is a 12 megapixel lens, right? Something like that. Sound familiar? Okay? That means that when your photograph is captured, it can capture 12 million little tiny squares of color. Okay? So if we keep blowing up, we have a photograph here. If we keep blowing that photograph up, at some point, we'll see a bunch of squares that are colored. And if you've ever zoomed in on Photoshop, at some point you reach that, right? Where you see the individual pixels that are individual colors. Okay? When it's small, right, when you have lots of them and the image is small, it looks perfectly clear. Okay? If you blow it up really big, it starts to get blurry or pixelated. Okay? And you probably experienced this happen. Same thing would be, I took this awesome photograph of a sunset on my phone. I love it. I want to print it out to be the full size of my bedroom wall. I want it to be 8 feet across. This is just so awesome. Right? You take it to the print shop, and they go to print it, and it's not going to look as good because you don't have the pixel density. And so there are theories that have come up about how do you get higher and higher density images. But the point is, at some point, no matter how dense the image is, if you blow it up big enough, it'll be pixelated. Right? It's fundamentally made of pixels. So that's the kind of thing that we're very familiar with in photograph form. In terms of raster graphics, there are some advantages over vector graphics, which is what we'll get to, and that is that because they're made up of pixels, you can edit individual pixels of color and make them whatever you want. Okay? i.e., I'll use the clone stamp to copy this piece of grass over here to this piece of grass over here. Right? It's really easy. It's just a pixel swap. Okay? It's great for photographic images because that's the way we see. There's subtle variations in color and tone, and it can be done really well in this format. Right? It's generally easier to edit where there's complex colors involved. Right? So we have a photograph. We want to make a few retouches to it. It's really easy to do. We've done that in Photoshop. Right? Because we're editing just the pixels themselves. Okay? It's also easier to apply fancy effects. We didn't concentrate too much on the effects menu in Photoshop, but you can do some fancy things with it because it can register this is just a pixel, right? And it's looking at it in that context. Okay? There are, however, some disadvantages. No surprise, we already kind of covered this a bit. The more you zoom in, the more blurry or choppy the image comes. The other thing is that the file sizes get really large in comparison to vector graphics. So we have a trade-off in file size, computer power necessary, right? Let's say we had a gigapixel image, really, really big image, right? It's going to bog down the computer quite a bit because it's just such high resolution. Okay? So lots more in terms of computer memory and processing power. Vector graphics, on the other hand, are mathematically defined graphics, right? So let's say, for example, we have a cube or a square, right? Well, there's 4 corner points to the square. If we know where those 4 points are, the computer can fill in that square. It can draw a line between those points, connect the dots, right? And the only information that the computer requires are those 4 points, right? You could actually argue that it really only needs 2 points to make the square, right? Because you could write a formula for how to connect the 2 dots at a right angle, for example. But the point is that it's very, very small bits of information, right? The other thing that can happen is when we go to blow it up, we make it bigger, it's still mathematically defined. This exists, right? It's a sharp line between point A and point B. No matter how big we make it, it's always going to be a sharp line. Okay? So there's definitely an advantage when we start to scale images. So let's say we needed to take a graphic and we wanted to take it from something that was on a business card and we wanted to blow it up to be on the size of a billboard on the side of a freeway. If it was a vector graphic, it would be perfectly sharp at the billboard size, and it would be perfectly sharp at the business card size. Okay? The other thing, because it's mathematically defined, these shapes, it's really, really small in the file sizes. It just takes a little bit of code with some math. Right? It's not a pixel by pixel representation. It's not this pixel is this color, this pixel is this color, this pixel is this color for 12 million pixels. Right? Here's 4 points. Connect them, fill them in with one color. Okay? It's much easier on the computer in terms of memory because you're not dealing with all those 12 million little dots. All right? Again, it's just math. So what are the disadvantages of vector graphics? Well, the disadvantages are that they're not particularly good for things with lots of complex color, i.e. a photograph. Okay? So if we look at this example here, right, this is reasonably clear. Right? The first one right there is a photograph. We see lots of nice tone, right, especially down here in the below the eyes, right, the gradients against the hair, those kinds of things. We see really clear. If we look to the image next door, right, this is a vector graphic approximating a photograph. And if you look carefully at it, you could see color blotches. Right? These are mathematically defined areas. Right here is all the same color. Right? Right there is all the same color. And so these little color blotches mean that the photograph is more artistic or more graphic in nature, not a true photograph. Right? So we wouldn't use vector graphics to do this kind of a photograph. Right? We'd use raster graphics for it. However, if we wanted to do things like a logo or something, right, that would be very appropriate. A non-photographic image would be very appropriate as a vector graphic. Okay? Vector graphics aren't as universal as raster graphics. Generally, it takes a little bit more sophisticated program to read the math and understand what the shapes are. Right? When we get to raster graphics, i.e. a JPEG, a PNG, photograph file, right, there's lots of different programs that can open them. Right? All you have to, Microsoft Paint can open a photograph. It's not particularly fancy. Just display all of these pixels in all of these colors. Okay? So when to use raster versus when to use vector. Okay? So we already talked, raster's great for photographs, great for high dynamic range images. So generally speaking, raster equals image. Right? Vector, on the other hand, is for Your architectural work, your line drawings, right? AutoCAD, Rhino, those are all vector-based. Okay? Great for line drawings. Really good for logos. We're going to spend a whole lecture on logos. You're going to do a logo. I think it's 117 or something like that, where we're going to do logos, and you'll have that experience. Remember, scaling is really important, right? So if you have a logo that works on a business card, if it's a vector graphic, we could scale it up to be on the billboard without a problem. Okay? Type is another really good example of a vector graphic. Okay? If type was a raster graphic, if we made the font size bigger, the edge would get pixelated. It wouldn't be sharp anymore. So we want type to be a vector graphic because we want to be able to make it bigger and have it still be sharp. So again, it's mathematically defined. Okay? So here's an example, right? We took this little logo at the top of this little brochure. Okay? We have different resolutions in our size here. So if we look at the first example right here, our resolution of 250 by 78, right? The vector size, very small, 36 kilobytes. The bitmap size, it's a little bit larger, 57. Not a big deal, right? Relatively small size. Let's jump all the way up here to a bigger size, 1500 by 466. Notice that the vector size, exactly the same, right? Doesn't matter how large it is, it's math. Okay, we can scale it up. The raster size, right there, at 2 megabytes, right? Significant difference in file size. Significant difference in computer power required to work with it. Now, obviously, a 2 megabyte image, that's nothing. It's not a big deal. Okay? But the concept is still the same. Right? The vector is significantly lighter in terms of resources and size. Okay? Here's another example here. Same logo. Right? When it is a vector graphic, we have the perfectly sharp edge, right along in here, nice and sharp. This is blown up to 1600%. If we had it as a rasterized graphic right there, there's all of our pixels. Right? We could have had a higher resolution to begin with, but at some point of blowing it up, we're going to end up with these pixels on the sides. Right? They're just not fully sharp. So it's not infinitely scalable. Oops. Sorry. Hold on. Go back. Computer programs. Right? Sometimes it's important to distinguish what is one versus the other. Right? And you could probably intuitively guess this. Okay? So programs like Photoshop, obviously, are for raster graphics. Right? GIMP is just a variety. It's a free version of Photoshop. V-Ray, however, I know a lot of you haven't taken 136 yet, but you will. V-Ray is a raster graphic program. Right? It does the math, it does the calculation, and it produces just a photographic image, pixel by pixel. That's it. Okay? Vectors, we're talking about Illustrator. No surprise, I'm talking about vector graphics. We're in Illustrator. They should go hand in hand, right? InDesign, very similar, right? But it is also a vector graphic. AutoCAD, definitely a vector graphic, math-based, right? We'll talk about coordinate systems in AutoCAD when we get to that section. Okay? Vectorworks, Revit, Rhino, right? These are all vector programs. Okay? So there's just subtle differences, and it's important to distinguish between the two. Okay? So like I said, today was a little bit short in this part of the lecture. I'm going to move over onto the computer, and I'll talk about how to make your font and how to get it to work. Right? And then we'll go from there. Okay, there appear to be enough of you that have gotten to the point where you want to make the font. This is by no means a end-all perfect solution for making a high-quality font. But again, it was about the practice, not about the font itself. So if you've made it to the point where you have all the letters, I'm going to walk you through how to make the font so that you can get the reward of having it work. If you didn't make it through all the letters, at least keep working on it until the end of class. And a 1040 to 1050 or so, post JPEGs of however far you got, okay, both pages. If you get to all of them, if you try to make the font and you haven't done all the letters, it's not going to really turn out very well. But if you've made it to all the letters, I want to show you that. So I have completed the first and second page. So here's my first page that's done. I have it organized to where I have my font and I have my background and I have my guides. We can turn off the guides for now because they're not really relevant to what we're trying to see. And I'm going to make sure that page 1 is active. I see all of my letters. I do have to include the QR code and the kind of the brackets because that's how the website determines what my letters are. If I were to turn in this to them, they wouldn't know where the letters are. So the rest of this does have to exist. I'm going to go ahead and go, previously we've always done file save for web. Because of the quality issue that we need, I'm instead going to go to file export. And when I select file export, I'm going to change my save as type to be PNG. And this is going to be exercise 114 page 1 right here. I'll go ahead and click on save. And then I'm presented with the PNG options. This is where I ask you to change from 72 to 300 so that you have a higher quality output. And then I'll go ahead and say OK. And that is then page 1. I'm going to move on to page 2, which essentially is turning on the lowercase letters in the background for the lowercase letters. I'll go ahead and go to File, Export. This is going to be exercise 114, page 2. I'll go ahead and save. And once again, I want to make sure my resolution is set to high at 300. And I'll say OK. Then I'll move on to the Paint Font website. So I typed in paintfont.com. And I'm going to go to the second option, which is to upload your completed template. So here it is. I'll select my 2 files. So I'll click on Choose File. We'll pick on page 1. And I'll say Open. We'll pick page 2. There it is. And I'll click Open. So I have page 1 and page 2. I can give this font a name. Okay. And I can also choose an open type or a true type font. It makes no difference whichever one you choose. Okay. I'll go ahead and start the upload process. And if all of us did this at exactly the same time, it would probably crash their website. But we're going to try and see if it works. So there it is. And so we see my preview. It has all the characters, which is good. There are a few things that aren't quite aligned correctly in the lowercase letters, for example, but it's not too bad, right? Like the B and the A are higher than the C and the K, right? That's what we get. It's free, right? So now that I'm done, I'm going to go ahead and click this pinkish button for download the font. And it's going to download my TrueType font. Now I'd like to prove that it works. Okay, so on the course website, under today's exercise, at the bottom, there's an InDesign file, sample font INDD for exercise 114. I'm going to use this InDesign file. But before I can use it, I have to install my font. And so if you remember back a ways when we did the typography, I showed you how to use that AMP font viewer to temporarily install a font on your computer. I'm going to go ahead and open up that from my flash drive here. I thought I put it in here, but of course I didn't. So I'm going to have to download it again. Let me go to the AMP font viewer. And I want to download this file. Hopefully yours is still on your flash drive. So there it is. Let me show it in my folder. And I'm going to extract this to my OneDrive here. Put it in here. And let me do one more new folder. Viewer. And we'll stick it in here. And so let me go ahead and extract all of that to right there. And then once it's done, I can go ahead and click the font viewer, which brings up the font viewer. I'm going to go to not installed fonts. And I need to take my font and actually move it onto my flash drive. So let me show and then copy this TTF And I'm going to put it in my resources folder and then in my fonts folder, which is where I store the extra fonts that I use. And I'll go ahead and paste that there. There it is. And I'll jump back to the font viewer. And we need to go to my OneDrive, which it conveniently is not showing me. How nice. Tell you what, let me put it on the desktop and we'll load it from there. So let me show it, copy it, and I will put it there. And then I'll go ahead and jump back to the font viewer. I can go to desktop now. There it is. And I'm going to install the font temporarily. Yes, I want to install it temporarily, and we'll leave this open. Okay. Now that this is open, we'll go ahead and jump back to my sample font INDD that I downloaded. And we'll open up InDesign. And once InDesign is open, I can say, OK, I'm going to take all of this and assign it to the font, which was my name, which it conveniently did not install. There it is, right there. All right, so there's my font. Okay, now that it's done, I'll go ahead and go to File, Export. I'm going to save it as a JPEG into today's folder. Nice. There it is. And I'll save it as the sample font JPEG, and I'll go ahead and click Save. Yes. And export. So now I have this in a sentence, right? I proved that it works, which was the idea. And from here, I can just go ahead and make my post on the course website. So I can go to New Post, and I'm going to do two things. One, I'm going to set the featured image as that sample font, and then I'm going to upload the TTF to the page itself. So we could say download, and I can go ahead and upload that TTF, which was on the desktop. All right, looks like a few of you were successful. That's good. So here it is. I'll insert it, which will give me a link to it. There it is. I'm going to set my featured image. Scroll all the way down, set featured image as the sample font. There it is, set featured image. And then I'll give this a title. This was exercise 114. And then I will tag it and then post it. So let's see here. Exercise 114, and then we'll go ahead and publish. Okay. Again, if you didn't make it, or your font doesn't turn out correctly, or their website crashes and won't let you do it, just post your 2 JPEGs of however far you got with your letters. Okay. All right.